Hey everybody, it's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun, host of the Victoria Real Estate Show with my friend.
Hey everybody, it's Andrew Plank with Royal LePage, co-host, and we have today Russell Cass from Home Check. Hi Russell.
Hi guys.
How's it going?
All fantastic, living the dream.
Excellent. So today we're going to talk about Strata docs. It's something we talk about periodically, but we were going to dive into a little bit about what to watch for and such. Russell, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I mean, we analyze them, Strata documents, depreciation report, financials, the rules, Strata plan, any engineering reports, AGMs, SGMs. I don't really go through Strata minutes, although sometimes you can get information there, but there's no money that can really be approved, no significant money, other than discretionary amount.
Right.
But yeah, I find going through those, there's more documents in the Strata minutes sometimes there is with all the other collective together.
That's true. That's true. I find that reading the Strata minutes is more like reading the diary of the building.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And
politics.
So it's good to know what's going on there, but it's something I think that most buyers are going to be qualified to read through. There could be some flags in there, but the big picture information is generally in the other stuff, and it's so complicated. It's really good to have an extra set of eyes to help out with that.
So I like using you, Russell, for my inspections on condos because you are also a depreciation report writer, and that you go through all the finances. You look at the condo itself, but you also look at the building. And I find that really is like a comprehensive perspective of the building for the buyer. And you have a depth of knowledge also of seeing these buildings over time, which in an inspection environment, which we don't.
Right. And you're fastidious.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Does that mean good looking?
Yes.
So we do have a depreciation report that a client of mine is interested in. I'm not going to identify which building it is, but I will ask you a question. Are all depreciation reports equal?
No.
What's the difference between different? Is it different companies? Is it the contents that they're analyzing? All of the above?
A big question. Start is there's a guideline, but it's a pretty strict guideline because it's the regulation.
This is a BC government guideline, right?
Yeah, and it's the regulation. So I'm saying guideline, but it tells you what you must have in the report. It has one section that I find probably 90 or maybe even 95% of the depreciation reports do not actually fully comprehend what it means, and it's the word evaluate. It tells you that you must do a full physical asset inventory and evaluation. Now, what does evaluation mean? Because I see that as the biggest area of confusion, perhaps, is that some evaluate and say it has everything to do with the assessment and how the asset works. And that's partly true. But the regulation, if you read through part 6.2, will go on to explain that the evaluation, and I think criteria, in fact, I know this is true because I've spoken to the person who wrote the regulation, is you must evaluate, does it need to be repaired? And repair is generally an instantaneous thing. So it's broken or it's really not working properly. So we need to repair it, get it in good condition. And then we need to look at the maintenance part of it, the maintain. And that's a cyclical thing. So every 5 years, we need to spend $1,000, whatever it is. And then to replace the asset. Question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, to me, it seems like having one reason why there's non-compliance in depreciation reports, because they're required every 3 years, is because like I've seen where somebody's got their depreciation report from 2013 and they're still referring to it. It's 2012, 2022 now. It's 9 years later. and they haven't done an interim one. Every 3 years is what is required, right?
Yeah,
And
they can defer.
right, but they have to have a 75% vote, right?
Yes, and they have they must do it. It says every 18 months, but really it means annually. Because if you didn't have your AGM on exactly the day and you missed the year, you're in contravention. So they give you 18 months.
No, a depreciation report is not, it's not inexpensive. You know, they're costly to do right. It involves, you know, quite a, quite a deep dive into the assets of the building and the building itself. A lot of calculations on future costs and so forth. So doing it every 3 years, that is the legislation. And again, people do vote to not do it. And Jane is right. We see it all the time where there's, you know, a depreciation report from 2015. At least they got one. You know, some of them have never had one. But so some information is better than none. What would you say is, you know, reasonable? I mean, every 5 years, every 3 years, every year?
So the regulations are being reviewed. There has been a whole bunch of stakeholder meetings. I nearly made it onto the stakeholder group, but I got to talk to the lady that did the regulations, and we had, you know, an hour or hour and a half chat, whatever it was. And we spoke about that. There is a strong move to make it every 5 years. And I resist that. And I explained to her why. There's also been a move. Carol James announced, I think it's 2 or 3 years ago, that stopped the deferral. So you can't defer. And I'm not in agreement with that either. My suggestion is keep it at 3 years, allow a deferral period for 2 or 3 years after that. So now you must do it in actual fact every 5 or 6 years. It must be done, but it actually says 3, but you can defer for up to 3 years.
So you can't defer beyond that, is what you're saying, though.
That would be the way I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to lift my hand when I have a question so that you guys know that when I ask a question. So you do it differently, though. You do an initial report and then you do an annual follow-up every year, right? And then 3 years later, you do another big report. So you spread the cost over time, correct?
Yes, correct. And I do that because then you have eyes on constantly. And you will pick up the little things that start to happen that if you only saw them in 5 or 6 years, those little things may have caused much more significant costs to occur. So catch it early, put your money into a technical guy coming around every year, and do away with the big expenses. That really is the intention of the regulation. That's why it talks about repair and maintain much more significantly than it talks about replace, because that's the way to keep your building and your cost expenditure in control.
So when you're looking at you mentioned you don't look at minutes, but I do know that minutes are important because let's say they're talking about replacing the siding because it's cracking or whatever over time. And then
somebody complains about water leaks or
And then you go to the depreciation report and you see whether or not it's in place for replacement. But if it's being repaired, then you're having a duplicate cost both in your current expenditures and your planned expenditures.
Yeah, so that's true. But assets, and I don't know if I've said this to you guys before, but they're either flexible or inflexible. If they're flexible, it means you can do repairs and extend the life potentially. If they're inflexible, those are the assets that you can do the repairs. It's kind of like the tires in your car. You can balance the tires, you can do the alignment. Those tires are warranted for 100,000 kilometers. You may get the 100 or you may get 103. But the guy who does no balancing, no alignment, none of that stuff, he may only get 88.
Right.
Okay, so I have a question. So we're looking at, we're basically creating a financial picture for 30 years for a building, and we're looking at two types of assets, right? What do you define them as? Like stuff that needs to be done and stuff that maybe is flexible about being done. For instance,
So the flexible, if you start thinking of it, your inflexible assets would be the ones that in doing the report, you would be the first ones you would plot into your timeline of 30 years because you can't move those dates around. if you happen to find that there's a whole group of assets that are falling at around about the same time and they're flexible, you would begin to allocate more repair and maintenance money to those to shift the timeline so that your cash flow isn't devastated all in that 2 or 3 year period.
And I
That-
think people do that naturally anyway, though, right?
Well, no, not on the reports I see. I see reports where, in 2034, there's $4 million worth of expenses, and 90% of those expenses, or 80% of them anyway, are flexible.
Right.
And so they're all lumped in there with an inflexible, which can't be moved.
I think what Jane might be saying is that, and we see this all the time with, when it comes time to vote to spend the money, vote to do the work, because these depreciation reports are the guides. But when the strata goes to look at them, that's where they take that information, hopefully understand that idea of flexible versus inflexible, and say, these things, we can replace those single pane windows or even those double pane windows from the late 80s. We can wait on replacing those. They're not broken. Let's wait on that while we do this other more imminent thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Jane, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to bring up a depreciation report here. This is for a building, and I wanted to just focus on a page because I think this gives a great picture of fixed costs that are going to be coming up and major costs for the buildings. They're identified in here. So what are we looking at here? This is on page 9.
So I actually have that depreciation report, and I've done some analysis on it. And it's really not a bad report at all. When I look at, I think it's 2034, there's things like concrete surface, membrane replacement, and elevator all at the same time.
Right.
The elevator upgrades have some flexibility to them. Now, if it's a code requirement, that's different. But generally, these are upgrades because an elevator, remember, is something that's inspected annually. It must be by regulation. And all stratas have a contract with an elevator company. So they can see what's coming way ahead of time. But if it's code required, that's different. But in this particular case, there is some flexibility here. So linking it with the concrete surface membrane, which has very little flexibility, you could change that by moving those things apart. And why it's important, Jane was laughing at me on another job when I was mentioning part 611 of the regulation. It really is important because 611 is controlling the money that the strata collects and then invests collectively, and its priority is to protect the money, which is really important. But when you're trying to protect money, and in this case, you're going to be raising around about $1 million at that one period. Well, to raise $1 million, you've got to put it somewhere while you're building it up. And 611 says that can only go into a guaranteed investment. So you're going to be lucky to get 1%. If construction inflation is running at 3%, you're losing 2% every year. So there is a building in town that took 14 years to raise $3 million and lost $1 million or 1.2 million in the process of doing it.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that's the enemy.
So one of the things it says on this report is the strategic plan represents an estimate. So what this means is this is where they think things are going to happen, but it's not necessarily going to follow through on that plan.
Yeah.
And assets may be replaced earlier or later, depending on the quality of maintenance, in service, and other factors. So they're building in a comment here that, yes, here is the 30-year plan, but expect it to be flexible.
Yeah, it should be flexible. Of course, you can't predict 30 years into the future. This graph, which shows upcoming upcoming costs for repair, replacement, and so forth. It's often you see this in 3 versions, and this looks pretty scary if you look to 2039. You've got almost $5 million expected in costs coming up, and when you think about that from a special, if there's no money in the contingency fund, that can be a big hit for all the individual owners at that point, and it can be scary for owners reviewing these. So it's important to understand that, and this is where the three different scenarios come in. As you're putting money aside in the years to come, that can help to buffer and bring those special assessments down quite dramatically if you're putting money aside in advance.
Go ahead, Jane.
So I just want to bring up the next page, which is the next 10 years. And the reason why they're looking at 10 years is because people are likely to move within those 10 years. So when we're planning, I mean, we're not going to plan, when you own a house, you're not going to plan to replace the roof in 20 years and start saving up now. That's just reality. Wouldn't you say?
It's true.
Yes and no. In the case of a Strata, it's a little different because that 2039 year is going to be raising around about $5-6 million. So that it would take time to raise. And going back to 2 points that were made earlier, very difficult to project 30 years into the future. And I had to laugh because honestly, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it just compounds how difficult that is. And everything that is done is at a best guess, really educated, doing the best we can and still miss the mark.
And
the special levy in some ways is a better vehicle because the owner is able to invest that money themselves and maybe get an 8% return. So by the time the special levy comes, their money is actually been building money for them.
right.
But a special levy that arrives by surprise is the one that really hurts. The one that 2039, it's coming, and you live in this building, well, you're putting away your $200-300 a month because that's what you're going to need.
Right.
And that's divided by the total number of people or units in the building. So
Yeah.
it's not as onerous as people think.
Right.
So they also talk about in this implementing the projects in targeted, phased, comprehensive, and bundled. To me, phased really makes sense. That's spreading the cost over time. So obviously you're going to be having, some balconies. Let's say balconies have to be, waterproofed or whatever. I don't even know if that's a real thing, but
It's a real thing.
Okay. Or windows. So, you can do the east side first. You can do the south side next. You can do the west side because they're going to be exposed to different weather. And so that the phase projects make sense to me. Do many?
Yeah, phase projects always make sense because it's spreading the cash flow. Where they don't make sense is where we're in a real inflationary situation. So doing it today, so roofing, for example, 30% increase last year. So if we could have done that roof last year, instead of waiting the additional 2 years, we would have got it at a better price than what we were likely to get it next year. In fact, next year, if we're trying to get that roof, we'd be lucky to get somebody to come and quote by March next year, let alone do the job. So as conditions change, you got to be flexible and aware of what's going on to deal with it.
True.
Otherwise, you end up spending too much. So bundling makes a lot of sense. You put a whole bunch of projects together. You got people on site already. Makes a lot of sense. Unless we're in a recession, then we may want to go the other way. So there's all kinds of situations that affect us.
Right. And again, it goes to bottom line, these are a guide. And at the end of the day, the owners of the strata will be voting on what to do and how to allocate those funds and where to prioritize the work. And some things are non-negotiable. You've got a leaking roof, you've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
But other stuff can be put off for quite a long time. And we see some buildings like that. The takeaway for our buyers, for our clients here is when you're looking at a building, get a sense of how people are, regardless of these depreciation reports. These are useful bits of information, but how have people voted in the past, and what's the mix of ownership in there? How are they caring for it now? And that's going to give you an indication of what it's going to look like in the future. And definitely, I have so many buyers say, oh, I don't want to pay that high strata fee. Let's find a place with really low strata fees. I have to explain to them that, low strata fees does mean you're still putting money aside yourself, for when the special assessment comes. And as you said, Russell, maybe that's a good idea because you can invest that your own. If you sell in 3 years, that money's in your pocket and not in the Stratas. But you should still account for that in one way or another.
So this is actually pretty topical, the graph that I have right now. So what they did was look at the current funding model and what's in the contingency reserve fund. And then they're looking at what is being contributed annually and then when the special levies are going to happen. And so they do target 2034 as raising a million, probably 300 or something by then. That's going to be a special assessment divided by everybody in the building. And then the next big cost is going to be 2039. So there's different scenarios based on so this is scenario 1, I guess. And then the next one is the alternative scenario where they're building up the contingency reserve fund more over time. And then they have the next one where they have less special levies and they're saving up more money.
There's really they've taken it down to 2 special levies. They've only dropped the that 5 million special levy down to, about 3.5 million, pardon me. That's a big difference. But they've taken away all the rest, but they've dramatically increased their strata fees. Leo has a comment here. Do you want to bring that up?
Sure, go ahead.
Interesting perspective that the special levy is in some ways the better strategy. In a normal market, do you find buyers are taking into account the state of the reserves and paying less for less well-capitalized stratas?
Paying less for less well-capitalized stratas. You mean because there's more money to be? Yes, I do think it makes a difference because I personally belong to a strata where they do special levies every year, and I think banks don't like them.
The banks don't like them. Buyers don't like them. They get a little bit scared of them. And then on the other hand, it can give a lot of confidence to a buyer when you see a well-funded contingency reserve fund. And of course, that's money, as we've alluded to. It's not exactly, there's 31 units, you divide by 31, and that's what your contribution is, because it depends on the size of your unit and there's more to it. But that is money that speaks to value. If there's $30,000 sort of set aside that you might say was sort of for your portion, that's $30,000 almost in the bank when you buy that. It's not money you're going to receive, but it's money you can put into growing that, as opposed to a few dollars in the contingency and knowing you have to take it out of pocket.
So this is where like the 3 scenario idea I think is excellent, because in this particular case, in the first scenario, by contributing to the CRF, they're going to raise just over 3 million over 30 years. The special levies will be 8.8 million. So that is where owners really have to be putting away the money themselves. Mm-hmm. In the second one, it's kind of balanced. They're at about 6.1 in contribution and 6.3 in special levies. So they're almost 50-50. And in the third one, they've swung it the other way now. They're contributing 9.5 million, and they're going to raise special levies of 3.7 million.
Right.
Contributions. Go ahead.
And so, for example, taking this back to the example about you saving this money yourself versus strata, the middle road is usually the best. Here, for example, if you bought your place today and then sold it in 2037, you'd have contributed a heck of a lot of money to contingency that was really intended for that 2039.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
And although we just, in regards to Leo's question, this is a building that's well funded. There's still going to be people who are going to, the people who are looking to sell and move will probably not want to have paid all that money into contingency and then walk away with nothing really to show for it.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, in this particular complex, one of the things that they mention in the minutes as well as in the depreciation report are the parking membrane. So do you have any comments on that?
It's underneath the building.
No rooftop parking?
So it's a big bundle of money. And it's the one that, and this is where, when I was talking to the folks from the regulator's office, my suggestion is, look, we need to protect the money, but we also need to have an awareness that when these big items come up and they're inflexible, you need to give a strata some leeway. So my idea, stupid as it is 75% approval. Let's say you can put 10% of your money into mutual funds or corporate bonds or something where there is a bit of a risk. It's not guaranteed. And there could be a mechanism if government got involved where it could be guaranteed, but limited, instead of 4 to 8%, maybe 2 to 7% or 6%. So their money would be guaranteed. The amount they got would fluctuate. Because raising, so the cost projected in 2039 is 3.2 million for that parquet membrane. That's a huge amount of money to raise, especially if you're going to lose over the time period, maybe another million.
Right.
That's $1 million of strata raised and just threw out the window.
Right. So is this an area of worry for this building?
No, it's the same for all buildings. They're all on the same level playing field. So where some of them will have parquet membranes and they've got the associated cost, others don't. They've got parking outside, but then they've got huge asphalt driveways and all those other things. So it all tends to kind of balance out. It's, in the end, is what it basically is. Every owner must do their due diligence, check and look into the building prior to. All these documents we're talking about really need to be analyzed and understand what's going on to know what you're buying into. What I've seen is when the market is very vibrant and really busy, nobody checks. They just jump in. When the market is slowed and money is tight, everybody is looking at the documents. It needs to not be random like that. It needs to be a constant. Check the documents.
So one of the things that you do at the end of an inspection is you go through and you look at the current plan and how much they have in their contingency fund, and then you look at how much somebody needs to save up over time. So what do you think somebody, in this case, a buyer, would need to start putting aside if they bought into the building?
Oh, good question. So I've done the calculation based on contributions for the 2021 financial year. In scenario one, their shortfall is $297.74 per unit per month.
So put away $300.
Yeah. In the next scenario, which is alternate, that was alternate two, $323. Why the difference? Well, alternate two has more money at the end of 30 years. Are we really worried about that? You got money at the end. Do you need more? Unlikely. Like you said, you're probably going to be there 10 years. So $300 is what it says. Now, this particular report, they have followed fairly closely what the regulation says. They do have repairs and maintenance. They do have replacement, but they are not consistent with their repairs and maintenance. When the regulation says you must do a physical asset inventory and evaluation, it goes on to talk about repairs, maintenance, replacement. If you're not going to put repairs and maintenance, you need to indicate, well, it's worthless, it's too far gone. But when you've got an asset that's going to be replaced in 30 years and you don't put any repairs and maintenance, that's not correct.
Right.
Give me an example.
Sorry?
Give me an example.
Replace all the water piping.
Oh.
So that's just a one-off hit.
Yeah.
The reality is you're going to have repairs and maintenance in the 30 years. You're not going to just do it as a one-off hit. So by the time you get to that, you may well have already replaced a third of it. Yeah.
Or even roofs, roofs need repair and maintenance over time. You need somebody to come check on it, because if there's something that starts to go wrong, with it, it's best to identify that soon, get it repaired, patch it, whatever, standing water, so forth. Russell, we started this out talking about, some of these depreciation reports are from like 2015, 2016. And it says, the current model versus, standard model versus, aggressive model or whatever. how does someone reading these know what model the Strata has been running on for the last year or two, if it's some years beyond, and
Okay,
whether or not that
it-
adjustment?
that's a good question. And what I'm going to tell you is it doesn't actually matter. Because if you know how much because a depreciation report, think about it, it's a simple document. It's going to tell you how much we need over 30 years. It's going to then tell you 3 different ways to raise the money to pay for those expenses. So all you need to know is, what have they done?
What do they
So
need?
if anything on that depreciation report is completed,
Yeah.
you know that's out of the list for what's still needed for 30 years. Then you look at the finances and see how much they're putting away. And then you calculate the shortfall. If you know what the shortfall is, everything else doesn't matter. You're putting away your $200 a month, your $100, your $500, whatever it is, you are ready for the future. If you're putting away your $500 and next year they increase the contributions by $50, well, you're now putting away $450. And that's as simple as it is. It's not complex.
Okay, I have another question. One of the things that has sort of come up to the forefront in the past number of years because of fires and floods and everything is insurance. So I just want to ask, so for instance, in this case, water damage, I'm just going to remove it because it has somebody's name on it, is at $50,000 deductible. And this is because people, I know you're not an insurance specialist, but people are, I'm just pulling it up here. People are having to get insurance for their insurance. That's something, a cost that people really need to be aware of, right?
And the thing to be really aware of there is the most you're going to get is 100,000. So if you're moving into a complex and they have a $200,000 deductible, you can only get insured for 100.
Okay. And in this case, it's 50 max.
Yeah. So, and generally, I say generally because this is the whole insurance world is upside down. I don't know if they're like, other areas where their profits are through the roof, or I have no idea, and I don't care. But what I'm noticing is every time a building has another significant leak or claim, they jump another 25,000.
Yeah.
So if you're at 50, you got 2 more strikes before you're getting into the land where you got to insure yourself for some of that. So this is a really important thing for stratas themselves to be starting to be diligent about. I was just chatting to my own strata about this. I'm actually going to put a device into my unit that will shut all the water off if the sensors detect water.
Yeah.
They have that in shutters.
Sorry?
They have that in shutters. In fact, I think it shuts off the water in the whole building.
Yeah, shutters, they have the electronic sensors, but when they put theirs in to what's available now, technology has moved way further down the road.
Right.
It's cheaper, it's more effective, and can be controlled whether you're there or not. And they come with backup batteries and all kinds of stuff. I mean, the technology in buildings is getting to be exciting.
Yeah. I've always thought, because insurance is really, they're there for these big expenses, these surprises. And some things are almost predictable. In a high-rise building, leaks are predictable. And, I would, you can get a discount, for example, on a house if your home is within X kilometers from the fire department. And, you get a discount if you have an alarm system. I don't see why they wouldn't start a policy of discounts for things like these water sensors. And, I know that they are now, it looks like they're, I think, requiring hot water tanks to be replaced within a certain length of time, as opposed to just letting them go. So there's a little more oversight on it. This is, controlling risk.
So Jane made a good point. Jane, go ahead and make another one.
No pressure, Jane.
Okay, well, I'm just curious because to me, after listening to every strata reports, not listening, watching them, reading them, it seems to me a central boiler system is more efficient and more effective, and you're less likely to have somebody's water tank bursting into your place, which is, I think, the major cause, is it not, of all the floods?
Well, yes and no. So a boiler system is circulating hot water 24 hours a day. So there's water moving constantly. Moving water creates friction if you've got some acidic content. So that starts to wear the pipes. In a hot water tank, individual hot water tank system, the water's static and there's only one line, just the cold. And it only moves when somebody opens a tap up. So there's pros and cons to both. So if you have a hot water system and you are replacing those tanks before the statistical failure period, you are less likely to have a problem. If you have a boiler system and you're wearing the pipes out at a quicker ratio, that's a whole different ballgame.
Pipes are really problematic to get into, all between the walls and so forth. This is also something out of control of most buyers, because unless you're buying, the developers, the person making the decision around these, and I'm sure there's some cost considerations as to whether or not you.
There's a company called High Tech Water. I know the guy who sells that stuff. And anyway, what they do is
You retrofit?
they add a water conditioner so that it because it's not only, there's like a particulates in water as well. So they wear out bends and all of that stuff.
Yeah, they're taking the water from an acidic to an alkaline, and they're doing a slight lining through the pipes, which it can be very effective unless the pipes are worn too far.
I love our show because it's almost like it's engineers that are going to be watching this.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to go through this?
Well, sure. So, we started this out by really just talking about depreciation report, but when you're looking to buy a strata, you're looking at a lot of documents, and these are the common documents that we tend to review. And there's a lot of elements to this review, and we're not going to go deep dive into this. Form B is really an overview of the strata itself, how much is in the contingency fund, whether there's money owed to the strata, what the strata fees are. This is a form that's specific to that unit and to the building, and it's a snapshot in time. It's a very useful document. Receiving financial statements will tell you, how money is being allocated, what it's being spent on. If there's really, really high fees for gardening or something, or water or something else, you can identify it there. The depreciation report, we've just done a deep dive on that, so we won't talk about that. Insurance certificate's important to look at for exactly the reasons we just talked about. What are the coverages and what are the deductibles for those coverages? Those can really vary. And it's important to know what your risks are and whether or not you need to get your own insurance on your insurance. Rental disclosure statement, that's a document that tells you really about the rentability of units in the building. And for example, whether or not those rentals are protected, depending on when that building was built, what the bylaws say and what this document says. Will inform you as to what that's going to include. So if you're buying a place and you don't want it to have rentals, or you're buying a place as an investment, these are important things to know, because you want to know whether or not the goalposts can change or move. Bylaws, obviously really important. I was just talking to some clients today about smoking bylaws in buildings. They want to be able to vape using legal marijuana. And they're finding every place they look at has, no smoking bylaws and no e-cigarettes and so forth. And I said, it's going to be pretty much across the board, most places we're going to see. But you got to read the bylaws, understand them, and also understand that they can move and change a little bit. That's where actually reading into and skipping down to the council minutes, or the AGMs, if you see some of the past history of them trying to get some votes in and not getting them through, they might be coming back to take other swings at that in the future. So bylaws are important. Rules can change annually. Bylaws are a 3/4 vote, and they're changed at the AGM or by a special general meeting, and a 3/4 vote to make a bylaw change. Rules are instituted by the Strata Council, and they can change annually. All good things to look at. Strata plan tells you what your unit is legally, what the common property is, how it's designated, whether there's some limited common property, which is common property that's just designated for your use. And again, changes to that can require a 3/4 vote.
Like your balcony.
Like your balcony could be common property, although nobody else is probably going to be getting onto it. It could be part of the strata lot, and that might impact your unit entitlement, which is The size of your strata lot could affect unit entitlement, which affects your strata fees. So you could have a small unit with a big balcony, but if it's part of your strata lot, you're going to be paying proportionally more than the person with the same size unit with a small balcony. Reading those minutes are important, but maybe from Russell's perspective, not the same kind of information. It's going to be more hints and information about, as I said, the diary of the place. Now, little hint here, when you were just talking about these and saying I've received them, one of the things that you're going to find is how do you know if something's missing or not? And so it's really important also when you're looking through these minutes and all of these documents, checking the, I don't think it's in the list actually there, but the general index.
Yeah, and also looking at the dates of, like, at the end of one meeting, when the next meeting is, and which happened during COVID a lot.
Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of missed meetings, and you'll see that, say next meeting is in July, it's June, next meeting in July, and then you don't see any July meeting, August meeting, September meeting says, these are the minutes and we've ratified the minutes from June. And so you can connect the dots on those, but it's really important to make sure that that happens so you don't find, I mean, Jane, how often do you find that Strata documents provided to you are missing something?
I do.
Yeah, how often?
Oh, quite frequently. It's
Very
funny.
frequently.
It's I used to just believe what I was reading.
Yeah, not any longer.
Then I grew up.
Right. And so the property management, the self-run strata, they might think they've given you everything. They may just have a file folder or whatever, but and there's stuff that's been missing for years that they just keep regurgitating the old stuff and here's our file, and then you do a deeper dive and you find something missing. And that's why there are other companies like Condo Clear that does, they will forensically look at all of those documents and they go deeper into. I don't think they may go as deep as Russell goes on depreciation report.
They do go deep, and they also
go wider,
look at all
for sure.
the legalities and stuff. But I do find sometimes they sometimes raise red flags where there isn't a red flag.
Yeah, and they're it's like sometimes when you consult a lawyer and they're going to give you their advice, but that advice is going to be so scary and it's going to be based on the 1/100,000th of a chance of something happening. It can sometimes just be a little over the top, but it's important that you get the information. You just have to take it all in context.
Russell, do you have any comments you want to add?
The list that Andrew just had up, I think, is extremely good. That really gets people to focus. There's a couple of others that could go on there because there are different dynamics coming into some buildings. One is legal action.
Yes.
The implication that would have buying in, there's a case going on. The other is any engineering reports.
Right.
Because often there'll be reports that are done as warranties are expiring. So they're done before the expiring of the warranty. And sometimes we go through those reports. There's a building in town, 2010, they had a report. They were suspecting water was moving through the exterior brickwork. And we go to that building and nobody's ever done anything. Because you look at the AGM minutes, no funding ever approved for that. So you can start tying the tails together if you've got all the documents.
Right.
Yeah.
I find too, these days we're dealing in 2022 here, and there's some buildings that were, let's say, remediated in 1996. And you don't see the depreciation report and the information that says how this was done and when it was done and so forth. And so some people might say that's not of any interest. But I do find that just having that is nice to know and know the exact dates that the building remediation happened, the building envelope was redone and so forth.
Yeah, and I do find the politics of the organization can change over time. Sometimes it is helpful to look back further than 2 years, but it can be a bit onerous.
Yeah. So we can ask for any of those. Like our standard contract purchase and sale for Stratas has a boilerplate which incorporates most of that, including engineer's report. Does not include information about legal findings, although I think the Form B is supposed to have recent legal stuff. And definitely the general index, which was not in that list, is a really useful piece because that's an index of all the changes that's been made to the strata plan, to the bylaws and so forth.
Which we're required to have now anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
This has been fun. I think what we've illustrated to everybody is you need to do some digging if you're going to buy into a strata.
Yes, and also hire a good home inspector, a condo inspector specifically, who's going to dig in for you as well.
Do your due diligence. Yes, I understand, and get the right experts in place.
Russell, how do people get in touch with you?
Home Check Canada running across the bottom of the screen, telephone number, email there. We're always available to help. We have 5 inspectors and an architect and 3 backup staff, a dog, a cat, and no, we're good.
Okay, I'm going to read it out because some people are just listening. So if you want to reach Russell, you can go to homecheckcanada.com. You can email his office at admin@homecheckcanada.com. And if you want to call them, you can call them at 778-351-1928. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay, Andrew, how do people reach you, you pro?
People can reach me by calling 250-360-6106. Email me info@andrewplank.com. Go to my website, andrewplank.com. I do have these posted on my website in the blog section as well for anybody looking for past episodes. And I also have a cat.
I have a dog. Her name's Ginger. And I don't normally drink wine in the middle of the day.
Okay. I wasn't going to say anything.
It was from last night. Anyway, my name's Jane Johnston. I'm with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun. My number is 250-744-0775. You can reach me at briarhillgroup@gmail.com. And all these videos are on VancouverIslandTime.com. And if you want to know about buying and selling, please visit briarhillgroup.com. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube. And we are also live every Monday morning. So please subscribe to Andrew's and my YouTubes. And we have lots of interesting information that comes up on a regular basis. So thank you so much. Je t'aime beaucoup.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Russell.
guys. Have a good weekend.
Have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.